No, that's impossible. The words slipped from Harold Bennett's lips before he even realized he had spoken them. His fingers trembled around the yellowed envelope as if it had suddenly become too heavy to hold. The room fell silent. Just a moment earlier, laughter had filled every corner of the old family farmhouse. Glasses clinked, children chased one another between tables decorated with white roses and old family photographs. Harold's 80th birthday had gathered 4 generations under one roof, a rare occasion everyone insisted would become another cherished memory. Instead, every eye turned toward the stranger standing quietly near the entrance. He looked to be in his late 50s. His dark overcoat was damp from the autumn rain, and his polished shoes left faint wet footprints across the wooden floor. Nobody recognized him. "I believe this belongs to you," the man said calmly. He didn't step farther into the room. He simply held out the envelope. Harold stared at it as though he had seen a ghost. His daughter Emily was the first to break the silence. "Dad, do you know him?" Harold opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His wife of 53 years, Margaret, reached gently for his arm. "Harold?" Only then did everyone notice the color draining from his face. The envelope was unlike any ordinary letter. Time had stained the paper into shades of ivory and brown. One corner had been repaired with tape that itself had grown brittle with age. Across the front, written in elegant blue ink that had faded but remained unmistakably careful, was a single name: Harold Bennett. Nothing else. No address, no stamp, just his name. The stranger finally spoke again. "My father asked me to deliver it." Harold looked up. "When?" The man answered without hesitation. 40 years ago." A ripple of confused whispers spread across the room. Emily frowned. 40 years? "Yes." "Why now?" The stranger lowered his eyes. "Because my father died 3 weeks ago." Silence settled once more. The only sound came from the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. Harold reached out with shaking hands and accepted the envelope. His fingertips brushed against the paper as though confirming it was real. Margaret noticed something no one else did. Her husband wasn't afraid of the stranger. He was afraid of the letter. Only an hour earlier, everything had been ordinary. Harold had woken before sunrise, just as he had every day since retiring from the local carpentry business. Even at 80, routines comforted him. He fed the chickens before anyone else was awake. He brewed coffee exactly the way Margaret liked it. 1 spoon of sugar, just enough cream to soften the bitterness, and stood on the porch watching morning mist drift across the fields. People described Harold as dependable, patient, honest. If something broke in town, Harold fixed it. If someone needed advice, Harold listened. He had built half the furniture inside the farmhouse with his own hands. To his grandchildren, he wasn't simply grandpa. He was the man who could repair broken toys, tell stories without looking at a book, and somehow make every child believe they were his favorite. Yet Harold carried one habit that puzzled everyone. Every October, he disappeared for exactly one afternoon. He always claimed he was visiting an old friend. No one ever asked which friend. No one had ever seen one. Margaret had learned decades earlier that certain questions always ended with the same gentle smile. It's something I have to do, nothing more. She stopped asking, or at least she pretended to. Margaret Bennett loved certainty. She balanced every family budget, remembered every birthday, labeled every storage box in the attic. She believed secrets were cracks that eventually became broken foundations. Ironically, she had spent 53 years married to a man who carried at least one. She convinced herself it couldn't be anything terrible. Harold was too kind, too gentle, too predictable. Still, every October she watched him leave. Every October he returned quieter than before. And every October she wondered whether love sometimes meant accepting questions that would never receive answers. Their daughter Emily had inherited neither patience nor silence. At 48, she worked as an investigative journalist in Chicago. Her career had been built on exposing lies hidden beneath respectable appearances. Corrupt officials, fraudulent charities, corporate scandals. She trusted evidence, not explanations. Watching her father freeze at the sight of one envelope instantly awakened instincts she usually reserved for investigations. She noticed details others ignored. The stranger never looked around the house, meaning he'd been there before, or had studied photographs. Harold never asked his name, meaning he already knew whose son he was. Emily said nothing. She simply memorized everything. Across the room stood David, Emily's younger brother. At 45, he had spent most of his adult life trying and failing to escape comparisons with his father. Harold built businesses. David started them, then lost them. Investments, restaurants, a construction company. Every ambitious plan ended with debts someone else quietly helped him repay. Harold never criticized him, which somehow felt worse. David loved his father deeply, but love mixed easily with resentment, especially when everyone expected him to become another Harold Bennett. He never did. Seeing fear in his father's eyes unsettled him. Seeing everyone else notice it made him uneasy. Then there was Sophie, Harold's 19-year-old granddaughter. Unlike the rest of the family, she had no interest in old grudges or hidden history. She studied photography, collected vintage cameras, documented moments everyone else overlooked. While the adults whispered, Sophie instinctively raised her camera. Click! The shutter echoed softly. She captured one image. Her grandfather holding an unopened letter. The stranger standing motionless nearby. Margaret gripping Harold's sleeve. Nobody smiling. Years later, she would describe that single photograph as the exact second her family stopped being who they thought they were. Finally, the stranger introduced himself. My name is Daniel Carter. No one reacted, except Harold. His grip tightened around the envelope. Daniel noticed. My father was Thomas Carter. Harold closed his eyes. For only 2 seconds. But they were the longest 2 seconds anyone in the room had ever witnessed. When he opened them again, he seemed suddenly older than 80. I thought Thomas was dead. Daniel nodded. He is now. No, Harold whispered. I meant years ago. Daniel studied him carefully. He wanted you to believe that. A murmur spread through the guests. Emily took one slow step forward. What exactly is happening? Daniel answered honestly. I don't know. Everyone looked at him. My father never allowed me to read the letter. Then why bring it? Because he made me promise. What did he tell you? Daniel hesitated, only briefly. He said that if Mr. Harold Bennett opened this before his 80th birthday, everything would be destroyed. No one laughed. No one breathed. Harold slowly turned the envelope over. The old seal remained intact, untouched, for 40 years. Margaret looked at her husband. Harold? He didn't answer. Instead, he whispered words almost too quiet to hear. I prayed this day would never come. Emily heard them. So did David. Neither understood what they meant, but both realized the celebration was over. Whatever had happened 40 years earlier had finally arrived at their front door, and it had come carrying someone's handwriting. For almost a full minute, nobody moved. The birthday candles on Harold Bennett's cake continued burning in the center of the table, their flames slowly shrinking, while the room around them became colder with every passing second. A celebration that had been planned for months had transformed into something else entirely. A courtroom without a judge, a family meeting without anyone admitting they were on trial. Harold stood at the head of the table, holding the envelope that had traveled through 4 decades to reach him. Finally, Emily spoke. Dad, open it. Her voice was calm, but everyone who knew her understood what that meant. Emily only sounded calm when she was trying not to show fear. Harold looked at her. For a moment, she saw something she had never seen in her entire life. Not guilt, not shame, fear. Real fear. I can't, he whispered. The words surprised everyone. Even Harold seemed surprised that they had escaped his mouth. David crossed his arms. Can't? He laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. Dad, it's a letter, not a bomb. Harold looked toward his son, and that small comment hurt more than David intended, because Harold knew something David didn't. Sometimes words could destroy lives more completely than anything else. Daniel Carter remained near the doorway. He seemed uncomfortable being the center of attention. I should leave, he said. Nobody answered. Harold looked at him. No. Daniel stopped. I brought it here because my father wanted you to have it. Harold swallowed. Your father hated me. Daniel's expression changed slightly. That was the first thing he had heard all evening that sounded personal. You knew him well? Harold looked down at the envelope. I knew him better than anyone. The room became quiet again. Margaret noticed something. Her husband never said, "I was friends with him." He said, "I knew him." There was a difference, a painful one. The family moved into the living room. Nobody wanted to continue the birthday dinner. Nobody wanted to pretend. The cake remained untouched. The presents stayed wrapped. The balloons slowly lost their air. Small signs that a normal evening had died. Harold sat in his old leather chair near the fireplace, the same chair where he had read bedtime stories to Emily and David, the same chair where he had fallen asleep countless evenings, the same chair where for the first time his family saw him as a stranger. Margaret sat beside him. "Harold?" He didn't respond. "Look at me." Slowly he did. She searched his face. After 53 years of marriage, she knew every expression he had. The look before he told a joke. The look before he apologized. The look before he admitted he was wrong. But this was different. This was the face of someone who had spent decades carrying something alone. "What is in that letter?" she asked. Harold looked away. "I don't know." Emily frowned. "You don't know?" "No." "Then why are you afraid?" That question landed harder than any accusation. Harold stared at the envelope. "Because I know who wrote it." Nobody spoke. Thomas Carter. David leaned forward. "The same Thomas Carter who supposedly disappeared?" Harold nodded. Emily looked between them. Disappeared? She had never heard that name before. Another secret. Another missing piece. Harold closed his eyes. "Thomas and I were friends when we were young." "How young?" Emily asked. 22. "And what happened?" Harold didn't answer. That was answer enough. Emily had spent years interviewing people who lied professionally. Politicians, business owners, criminals. She learned that the most important moments were not when people spoke. They were when people refused to. And right now, her father was refusing to speak. She looked at Daniel. "Your father told you anything about this?" Daniel shook his head. "Not much." "Not much isn't nothing." Daniel hesitated. "My father kept old documents." "What kind?" "Photos, letters, newspaper articles." Harold suddenly looked up. "What articles?" Daniel noticed the reaction. "About a fire." Nobody moved. Emily immediately caught it. "A fire?" Harold's face changed. Only slightly, but enough. "What fire?" David asked. Daniel looked uncomfortable. "The warehouse fire in 1986. Margaret's hand froze on Harold's arm. Emily noticed. "You know about this?" Margaret looked away. That was the second secret, and it belonged to her. Later that evening, while the others argued quietly downstairs, Emily found Margaret in the kitchen. Her mother was washing the same glass repeatedly, a habit Emily remembered from childhood. Whenever Margaret was nervous, she cleaned. "You knew about Thomas Carter." Margaret didn't answer. "Mom." The glass slipped slightly in her hand. I knew his name. That's not the same thing. No. Margaret placed the glass on the counter. It's not. Emily waited. She had learned patience from investigations. People often revealed more when they weren't forced. Finally, Margaret whispered, "Your father told me never to ask about that night." "What night?" Margaret looked toward the living room. 1986. Emily felt her stomach tighten. What happened? Her mother looked exhausted. I don't know. You don't know? I knew something terrible happened. With Dad and Thomas? Margaret nodded. But I never knew what. Emily studied her mother's face. She wanted to believe her, but another part of her remembered something. A woman who spent 53 years with a man would notice when he was hiding pain. Maybe Margaret wasn't innocent. Maybe she was protecting him. Or maybe she was protecting herself. Meanwhile, downstairs, David confronted his father. You lied to us. Harold looked tired. I didn't lie. You hid something. There is a difference. Not when everyone else pays the price. Harold looked at his son. David immediately regretted his words because he saw something familiar. The same disappointment Harold had carried every time David failed. Except now, David understood. His father wasn't disappointed. He was hurt. I spent my whole life trying to be you, David said quietly. Harold looked surprised. David, and I hated you for making it impossible. A long silence followed. Then Harold said something David never expected. I never wanted you to become me. David looked up. What? I wanted you to become someone who didn't have to carry what I carried. For the first time in years, father and son looked at each other without competition. Only two wounded people. But before David could answer, Emily entered the room. She held something in her hand, a photograph. Dad, Harold looked at it. His face changed instantly. The photograph was old, black and white. A younger Harold stood beside Thomas Carter. Both men were smiling. Between them stood a woman. A woman nobody in the family recognized, except Harold. Because the moment he saw her face, he stood up. Where did you get that? Emily didn't answer immediately. I found it inside the envelope. The room went silent. The envelope was sealed, Harold whispered. Emily nodded. I know. Everyone stared, because somehow a photograph had been hidden inside a letter nobody had opened. Harold reached for it with shaking hands. On the back, written in Thomas Carter's handwriting, were 7 words. She deserves to know the truth too. Margaret covered her mouth. David looked confused. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. Who is she? Harold stared at the photograph. For 40 years he had protected one secret. But suddenly, everyone realized something worse. Maybe he wasn't protecting the secret. Maybe he was protecting someone from it. And whoever that woman was, she was still alive. Harold Bennett had spent 40 years preparing for this moment. He had imagined anger. He had imagined accusations. He had imagined the day someone would finally discover what happened in 1986. But he never imagined standing in his own living room, surrounded by the people he loved most, while a single photograph destroyed every version of the past they had believed in. Emily held the picture tightly. "Who is she, Dad?" Harold didn't answer. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. The same rain that had followed Daniel Carter to the house. The same rain that seemed to have arrived with the past itself. Margaret slowly sat down. She didn't look surprised anymore. She looked defeated. And that frightened Emily more than anything, because her mother had always been the strongest person in the family. "Margaret," Harold whispered. His wife looked at him. "I knew this day would come." Emily turned toward her. "You knew?" Margaret closed her eyes. "Not everything." Her voice became quieter. "But enough." David stared at both of them. "How many secrets have you been keeping from us?" Nobody answered, and that silence became its own confession. Harold placed the photograph on the table. The woman in it was young, maybe 25. She stood between Harold and Thomas Carter, smiling at the camera as if nothing in the world could ever hurt her. Emily noticed something. Her father wasn't looking at the woman's face. He was looking at her hands. "Who is she?" Emily asked again. Harold took a deep breath. "Her name was Anna." "Was?" Harold nodded. "Anna Carter." Daniel suddenly stepped forward. "My mother?" Nobody moved. The words hit the room like something breaking. Emily looked at Daniel. "Your mother?" Daniel stared at the photograph. "I've never seen this picture." Harold looked at him. "No." A painful silence followed. "Because Thomas never wanted you to." Daniel's expression hardened. "My father spent his entire life telling me he had no family." Harold looked down. That was a lie. 40 years earlier, Harold Bennett and Thomas Carter were not enemies. They were brothers in everything except blood. They grew up together, worked together, dreamed together. When Harold opened his carpentry business, Thomas was the first person to help him build it. But Thomas had one weakness Harold didn't. Thomas wanted success faster than life could provide it. He borrowed money, made risky deals, trusted the wrong people, and eventually he found himself trapped. Thomas was drowning, Harold explained. He owed people money. "What people?" Emily asked. Harold hesitated. "The kind of people who don't forgive debts." David looked away. The family had always seen Harold as a man who avoided trouble. Now they were seeing the reason. He had survived it. "Where does Anna fit into this?" Daniel asked. Harold looked at him. Anna was Thomas's wife. Daniel's face changed. "My father told me she died." Harold looked down. She didn't. The room froze. Daniel stepped backward. "What?" "Your father wanted everyone to believe that." "Why?" Harold struggled to answer. Because he was ashamed. Nobody expected that. Not anger, not betrayal, shame. Anna discovered what Thomas had done, Harold continued. He had taken money from investors. He had hidden debts. He was planning to disappear. Daniel shook his head. My father wasn't like that. Harold looked at him. Your father loved you. The sentence surprised everyone. But love doesn't always stop people from making terrible choices. The warehouse fire, the name that had haunted the evening, the event that connected two families. Emily finally understood. Thomas caused the fire? Harold didn't answer immediately. No. Everyone looked at him. No? Thomas was there when it happened. A pause. But he didn't start it. Then who did? Harold looked at the photograph. The people he owed money to. The room went silent. Thomas found out they planned to burn the warehouse to destroy evidence. He tried to stop them. Daniel looked confused. Then why did everyone think he disappeared? Harold's eyes filled with regret. Because I helped him disappear. The words shocked everyone. David stood. You helped him? Harold nodded. I found Thomas after the fire. His voice became heavier. He was injured, terrified. He believed those people would kill Anna and Daniel if they found them. Daniel whispered, Me? Harold nodded. You were 5 years old. Daniel looked away. A lifetime of unanswered questions suddenly had answers. But my father abandoned us. Harold shook his head. No. His voice cracked. He sacrificed everything. Harold finally opened the envelope. The paper inside was fragile. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Thomas's final words. Harold read silently first. Then he looked at Daniel. Your father wrote this for you. Daniel didn't move. He never sent it because he was afraid. Harold began reading. Daniel, if you ever learn the truth, know this. Leaving you was the hardest thing I ever did. I wanted to come back every day, every hour. But every time I looked at your face, I saw a reason to stay alive long enough to protect you. Daniel covered his mouth. Nobody spoke. Thomas spent 40 years believing he had lost the right to be called your father. Harold folded the letter. But he never stopped loving you. Then came the final truth, the one nobody expected. Emily noticed something in the letter, a name, a signature, but not Thomas's. Another note had been attached, written by Anna. Harold read it, and his face changed. What is it? Margaret asked. Harold looked at Daniel. Your mother knew. Daniel froze. Knew what? She knew Thomas survived. Where is she? Harold looked toward the photograph. She spent years searching for him. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Why didn't anyone tell me? Harold looked at him with unbearable sadness. Because she died before she found him. Silence. But before she died, Harold held the letter tighter. She asked me to protect you. Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time that evening, he stopped looking like an angry son. He looked like a child who had spent 40 years waiting for someone to explain why he was left behind. Years of misunderstanding collapsed in one night. David apologized to Harold for judging him. Emily apologized for believing every secret meant betrayal. Margaret admitted her own weakness. I was afraid, she told Harold. I thought if I knew the whole truth, I would lose you. Harold held her hand. You almost did. She nodded. I know. Before Daniel left, Harold gave him the photograph. You should have this. Daniel looked at it. My father kept this for 40 years. Harold nodded. Because some memories are painful. Daniel looked at the picture. But losing them is worse. For the first time that night, Harold smiled. A tired smile, but a real one. Months later, Sophie displayed her birthday photograph in a small family exhibition. She titled it, The Moment the Past Came Home. People who saw it thought it was a picture about secrets. They were wrong. It was about forgiveness. Because the truth did not fix everything. It did not erase lost years. It did not bring back people who were gone. But it gave everyone something they had been missing. The chance to stop carrying a story that was never completely theirs. And Harold Bennett finally understood something he had forgotten. Sometimes the hardest letters to open are not the ones that reveal the past. They are the ones that allow us to let it go. The truth can hurt when it arrives late, but a hidden truth often hurts longer than the truth itself. People are rarely only heroes or villains. Most are simply trying to protect someone they love while carrying their own fears and mistakes.